Manchester United are back in business. A 7-0 win over Barnsley. All their players celebrated. They're buzzing. Ericsson said before the game, it's weird that they're getting this much criticism. It's unfair on us. We haven't started as badly as what people think. Low-key kind of do feel a little bit sorry for Ten Hag at times. Anything that happens is going to get a lot of press. They take on Crystal Palace. They were thumped last season in this fixture. But they've got a few players that look like they're finding a bit of momentum. Rashford looks a lot better since that goal he scored. Garnacho's been dangerous off the bench. And generally, I actually don't think they're in as bad a place as what maybe people are saying.
It's tough to judge Manchester United. They get all the discourse and all the chat. What I will say is that for all the complaints about fixture pile-up and there being too many games, I think the midweek game for Manchester United and Palace and the side like Spurs, it was actually a good thing. Obviously, United won 7-0 against a Barnsley side. Players got on the score sheet. Players gained confidence. Palace won 2-1 just about against QPR. But I think sometimes at this part of the season where you're struggling for form, just turning the tide over in the lower division does help to build confidence. I wouldn't say they're back, though. I think Man United are...
Well, it depends what back really means. I'm not saying title back. I'm saying they're just back to being eighth.
Yeah, well, back on track. I think for the first time in a long time going into this game, Ten Hag will be able to name his strongest 11. Maybe, but you probably put Luke Shaw in there if he was fit at left back. And they did their job against Barnsley. Not many people watched it because it's to say there's Champions League football. And they did a job against Southampton as well, despite the fact that Southampton performed very, very well in the first half. And up to the point where they missed the penalty, they were dominating that game. But this is a United side. They've got a lot of decisions to make. There's conversations about who should be starting in the front line. I like the look of Xerxes. I think he's a very technically sound player, but pretty profligate in front of goal so far this season. You look at Garnacho, who always leaves with something when he plays, if it's off the bench or from the start. And Diallo, who I think has been one of Manchester United's best players this season. Rashford's also coming to form, scoring a few goals in his last few games. So Ten Hag's got a decision to make in terms of his starting 11. But it's the Man United side that you start to see semblance of what they're trying to do. You saw it a bit against Barnsley. Ugarte started that game, played well. Obviously, it's against Barnsley, so you have to take that with a pinch of salt. And what he did as well, or what I took note of, is the fact that he had a knee injury. His knee was bleeding, gushing blood, but he carried on. And that's what's going to endear him to Manchester United fans. Yeah. And that's what made him a cult hero at PSG as well. I think in the bigger games, we're going to see how much he can stand up to the test in terms of not necessarily his technical ability, but his ability to help United control games. But in games against Barnsley, I think in the game against Palace on this weekend, I think he's going to shine. I think Man United, to answer your question, are back on track, but not necessarily back full time.
I mean, if they go 3 from 3, Southampton, Barnsley, even though obviously it's a cup game, but momentum is everything. You lose against Barnsley or draw, it changes where you're at. If you look at Palace, they've got no momentum. Beat West Ham at the start of the season. Lost to West Ham start of the season. Drew with Chelsea. Drew with Leicester to come from 2 behind and scrape past QPR. They've got no momentum either.
No, I completely agree. And Crystal Palace are a side that everybody was talking up at the start of the season because of the turnaround that people witnessed when Oliver Glasner first took over. Nice style of football, etc., etc. But, you know, fair play to them. They managed to keep hold of Mark Gay, which I didn't think was going to happen given the figures that were being talked about. Newcastle were pretty close to what they wanted. But Crystal Palace are a side that desperately need a result. And Manchester United might not be the Manchester United of the past, but if you beat them, it's still a big scalp in the Premier League. And so I think this could be a really, really interesting game for Palace at Selhurst Park as well, which is always a fortress for them in terms of the atmosphere. Is incredible. I do think you guys are being too kind to Manchester United, though.
I can hear you like growling whilst we're talking about them.
I think Erik ten Hag is on thin ice. I think everything that he's built has built on sand because, you know, we know that United were talking to other managers throughout the summer and they decided to stick with him probably because they didn't feel any of the other candidates were standout candidates, and the start to the season has been poor in my opinion. As a Man United fan, you should be looking for performances right now. You're not going to get that leap to being a title contender overnight. It's not going to happen, but the performances have to improve, and they don't seem to be under Erik ten Hag. I completely disregard this result against Barnsley. I know that you'll say it's momentum, and I agree with the momentum point, but generally, how much can I look into that? You know, how much can I look at that and say, well, I believe United have turned the corner now? I just don't see it.
I think also on that point, me and Kweku did a show where we watched the Southampton United game, and for 35 minutes, Southampton played them off the park.
They dominated them.
And so while I'm trying to be somewhat positive towards Ten Hag, because United fans in the comments get very agitated on YouTube, I'm trying to be nice to you. Harry's dissuaded me again and reminded me of what I watched last week. And in reality, Southampton did dominate United, and Southampton are probably one of the worst teams in the league.
Yeah.
But Palace, again, I come back to Palace, and you would have watched them against Chelsea. Just feels like they don't really know what they're doing yet.
Yeah.
They bought in Maxence Lacroix, and obviously they've got Mark Gahey. They've started playing a back three with Munoz and Tyrick Mitchell either side. Neither of them are wing backs, nor are they left or right sided midfielders. They're nor here nor there. And that midfield battle, like you said, of Kobe Mino, Ugarte against Decore and Wharton actually is quite a good midfield battle. But then there's Eze, and there's that little bit of spark that they can bring to any given game. That, for me, is the way they damage United.
Well, last season, one of the shining lights, and this is a big thing for United as well, in terms of this fixture against Crystal Palace. They need to exercise the ghost of last season. Lost 4-0 on Monday Night Football against Crystal Palace, where Palace were really in their pomp and they looked like they were on the upward trajectory under Oliver Glasner. These sides are in different places right now. But United had that in the back of their minds that they got turned over by Palace last season. You mentioned the midfield area for Palace. And people are asking questions. I see the narrative starting to build about Adam Wharton. Is he at the levels that he was at last season? I think it's been unfortunate. In 3 of the 4 games this year, he's been partnered with different midfield partners. It's been Will Hughes, Decore, Lerma. And so they've found it hard to get that consistency in midfield. I still think he's a very, very good player. And I think he'll be a transformative signing for any top side, cough, Manchester United, because that's what they actually needed as opposed to an Ugarte. But I feel like this Palace side have struggled to find what made them very effective last year. And everyone talks about the football and how well they were or how well they played on the ball. But defensively, they struggled this season. I'm not a stats man, but I've been looking at the stats for Palace. And their passes per defensive action last year went from 15 under Roy Hodgson down to 12 under Glasner, which suggests that they were up and at them. They weren't letting the opposition play football, and they'll disrupt the opposition in terms of them playing their game. It was like they're only behind Man City at the back end of last season. This year, in terms of the tackling percentage, it's plummeted in terms of them actually affecting play defensively, and that's affected them going forward. I do feel they've still got the bones of a very, very good side. But I think just finding that consistency in the middle of the park will be their issue. I think it might be their undoing against Manchester United, who should effectively have their first choice midfield in Mainu, Ugarte and Bruno Fernandes.
I think if I was a Palace fan, I'd be quite relaxed though, because the back end of last season was so positive. And I commentated on their game against Norwich City, and I know it was only a League Cup game, and there was a few changes, but not many, because Oliver Glasner hadn't had a victory yet this season. And so he felt clearly that the way to go was to play a strong side and go out there and make changes, rather than go out there, and make changes. And I could still see the principles of what you saw last season. So I'm confident that over time, they'll click back into gear. What's a good season for Crystal Palace? Staying in the league, first and foremost. And if you're 11th or 14th, does it really make that much difference?
What I also noticed for Palace as well is, I think Mateta had a good end to last season, but I don't necessarily think he's the answer or option for them long term as a striker. We saw against QPR in the Cup that Nketiah played for them, scored, ran the channels well, worked hard for the team. But you mentioned Nketiah is a good sign, and I was questioning it, but seeing the highlights of him in the QPR game, you realise that it's a good fit. He's a player that will work hard, is proven in the Premier League in terms of scoring goals, and just seems to fit with Crystal Palace. And if he can get going and score goals, it's similar to like last season where you looked at Iraiola's Bournemouth side, and I was accused of saying that he should lose his job, but you saw semblance of play, and a lot of people who watch Bournemouth a lot more closely than I do, saw that they were playing good football. It's just a case of getting those results. And with Palace, like you say, you can see signs of it. I've maybe not seen enough of it, especially when they play against Chelsea. But if they get a striker like Bournemouth did last season in the form of Dominic Solanke, who's going to put away 18, 19 goals, then you're going to be in a good place. If Nketiah can get to 15 goals for Palace this season, then they'll have a good season.
I mean, if you look at that 11, it's a very, very good 11 if they can click into place. Is this the weekend that's going to happen, Harry? What's your score predictions?
I'm going to go for a Crystal Palace win. I'm going to say it is going to happen this weekend. I'm going to go Crystal Palace 2, Manchester United 1. I've not been impressed by Manchester United. I still think they're easy to get at defensively. I know that people are talking about Marcus Rashford maybe coming back to his best form because of what happened in midweek. I still don't see it. I still think there's a lot of players in that team that aren't doing their bit. I don't think Erik ten Hag knows what his best team is either. I think although Palace's results haven't been there, their identity is there. And eventually that will come through. I think it'll be this weekend.
I've been accused of being a Manchester United hater. I still don't necessarily believe in Erik ten Hag. I don't believe in the construction of this squad. But I do think they get a result against Palace on the weekend. I think they win that midfield battle, and I think they win 2-0.
I think it'll be 2-1. I think Palace will score because United can't defend. But I just think United, like the Southampton game, just have so much individual quality. Someone can do something for them and paper over the cracks. But I do think it'll be very similar to the Southampton game. I think you'll see Palace's idea. Palace will do their bit. United will hang in there and something will happen.